Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. In the days after the fall of Sauron, when peace had begun to bloom like spring's first flower across the lands of Middle-earth, there came whispers from beneath the lonely mountain. Erebor, seat of Duran's folk and jewel of the north, had grown rich and proud once more. The dwarfs mined deeper than they ever had before, unearthing silver-veined halls and golden chambers forgotten by time. But deeper still, they found something else. It began with silence. The miners who went into the lower tunnels did not return. Then came the madness. A foreman struck his own brother with a pickaxe, screaming of voices in the stone. Another was found speaking to shadows, his eyes pale and unseeing. The dwarves, hardy and unyielding, tried to seal the deep shafts, but the stone would not stay shut. It cracked in the night, and tremors shook the lower levels. Smoke, black and bitter, curled from crevices that had been dry and cold. King Thorin III, Stonehelm, son of Dene Ironfoot, feared the darkness, but dared not abandon the mountain. He sent word to Balin, once a companion of Thor and Oakenshield, and now a traveler between realms. And Balin, ever brave, descended into the lower halls with a handful of stout warriors bearing torches and song. He did not return. It was then that Thorin III sent a raven to Gandalf the Grey, or rather Gandalf the White, as he had become since returning from his great battle with death and fire. The message was short, and its final words were scrolled in haste, as if the scribe's hand shook. Balin is lost. The stone hungers. We need you. Gandalf at that time dwelt in the gardens of Ithilien, speaking with King Elazar about the rebuilding of Gondor and the fates of old friends. But when he read the message, his countenance darkened. He rose without a word and left the city by dawn, staff in hand and cloak flaring like a storm behind him. The White Wizard rode north beneath silver stars and across the wild hills of Rohannon, where the grass grows high and the wind sings in the hollows. He passed through Dale, whose folk welcomed him warmly, though he stayed but a night. By the third morning, the lonely mountain loomed before him, sharp against the sky, snow upon its peak like an old wound still unhealed. At the gate of Erebor, Thorin III met him in silence. He was no longer the young Prince Gandalf remembered. The weight of the crown had bent his shoulders and grayed his beard, though fire still gleamed in his eyes. Inside the mountain, all was well lit and orderly, but beneath the gold and iron, a tension throbbed like a wound that would not close. "Be founded a month past," Thorin said as they walked through the Hall of Kings. "A black ore, harder than obsidian, but warm to the touch. At first it gleamed like polished coal, but the miners began to change, angry, secretive, some vanished." He paused at a great iron door, newly wrought and ringed with runes of warding. Balin believed it to be tied to Morgoth's ancient forges. He thought it might be a shard of cursed stone forgotten in the earth since the first day. "And you let him go down?" Gandalf asked, his voice quiet but hard. Thorin looked away. He insisted. He said it was his burden. That night, Gandalf stood alone on a high balcony, the stars cold above and the wind pulling at his robes. He could feel it now, the presence beneath the stone. Not a creature, not yet, but a will, old, hungry, and cunning. He whispered into the night, words of old speech few living could still shape. "E nedwi Balin melanin, may I not be too late." At dawn, a company was formed. Gandalf would not go alone. 5 dwarves were chosen, veterans of battle, loyal to Balin's memory and unshaken by fear. Among them was Fran, a cousin of Thorin's line, quiet but strong as bedrock. There was also Brock, a smith with arms like tree trunks, Nari and Dori, swift and keen-eyed brothers, and Orla, a healer whose touch could close wounds faster than most blades could open them. The company descended into the depths with only torchlight and Gandalf's staff to guide them. The upper tunnels were quiet, save for the distant drip of water and the echo of their own boots. But as they moved deeper, the stone changed. It wept. The walls bled black moisture that glistened like oil. Strange veins ran through the rock, dark and pulsing, almost like roots. And once, in a narrow shaft, they found a miner's helmet with no sign of the dwarf who had worn it. By the 3rd day, they reached the sealed shaft Bolin had entered. The gate had been smashed from the inside. Whatever he faced, Gandalf murmured, he did not flee. There was a silence then, heavy and long. And then Freyne said, "We follow." So the company passed into the shaft, and the air changed. It was no longer the breath of stone and dust, but something fouler, like ash and rot and iron mixed together. Gandalf's staff glowed faintly white in the gloom. The darkness was alive, watching, listening. And far, far below, something stirred. Something that remembered fire and forges and the voice of a fallen god. A tunnel ahead sloped downward, a gaping throat leading into the bones of the mountain. As Gandalf led the way, his staff casting a pale light along the walls, the dwarves followed close behind, their axes drawn and torches flaring. The air grew colder with every step, though no wind stirred. It was the kind of cold that seemed to seep into the soul, ancient and watchful. They passed the remnants of a broken camp, battered crates, scorched blankets, a shattered lantern still reeking faintly of oil. A torn banner bearing Balin's crest lay trampled in the dust. Dori bent to pick it up, brushing the soot away. His mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Gandalf noted it all silently, pausing to run his fingers along the stone where claw marks scored the wall in wide, looping arcs. Whatever had been here, it had not come for gold or glory. It had come for something deeper. As they descended further, the walls changed again. The stone shimmered faintly in the light, not with natural veins of ore, but with a strange black gleam, dense and glassy, as if something within the mountain had been melted, not mined. Orla, ever quiet, ran a hand along one patch of the wall and recoiled instantly, eyes wide. "It's warm," she whispered, like skin. They made camp in a chamber where the ceiling hung low and water dripped from twisted stalactites. No one spoke much. Even Brock, normally loud and quick to joke, sat sharpening his axe in silence. The air had grown thicker, heavy with an almost metallic taste. Gandalf stood near the edge of the firelight, watching the shadows flicker and curl. "This is no ordinary ore," he said at last, speaking low so his voice wouldn't carry too far. "It's not gold, nor silver, nor iron born of Arda's shaping. It bears the mark of something else, something from before the mountains rose." Prin leaned forward, his brow creased. "You mean Morgoth?" Gandalf nodded. Perhaps he twisted many things in the dark of the First Age. Creatures, metals, even stone. He wrought them not with craft, but with will and malice. What lies here may be a fragment of that old evil, buried deep until now. No one replied. The fire crackled. In the silence, a sound drifted up from one of the side tunnels. A distant scrape like metal dragging against stone. It came once, then again. Dori and Nari were on their feet at once, blades drawn, their torches held high, but the sound did not return. They slept in turns, though no one truly rested. Dreams were troubled. Fen muttered in his sleep, calling out names in a language no longer spoken. Orla thrashed once and woke gasping, eyes. Even Gandalf's sleep was broken, haunted by visions of great furnaces and blackened forges, of twisted creatures hammering at anvils with eyes like molten stone. The next morning, or what they guessed to be morning in the lightless depths, they broke camp and pressed on. The tunnels narrowed, forcing them to move in single file. Roots, or what looked like roots, jutted from the walls, writhing slightly at the edge of their vision. Once Nari swore he saw them twitch. They found another sign of Balin's party, an axe lodged in a crack. The haft scorched, the blade warped as if it had struck something burning. There was blood nearby, dried to black. Dori knelt beside it, saying nothing. Gandalf placed a hand on his shoulder, then turned and moved on. Later that day, they reached a vast cavern unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were smooth and domed, as if carved by something immense. At the center stood a stone altar, cracked and blackened, and upon it sat a lump of ore no larger than a fist, but so dark it seemed to drink the light around it. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing. The moment they stepped into the chamber, something changed. A pressure filled the air, like the tightening of 1,000 invisible cords. Orla gasped, dropping her torch, and staggered back. Brock cursed under his breath, gripping his axe. Dori and Nari flanked the altar, eyes wary. Gandalf stepped forward slowly, staff. The black ore did not move. But Gandalf could feel its presence, its awareness. It was not merely a cursed stone. It was a vessel holding something that remembered being powerful, that desired to be whole again. It was calling, not with words, but with want. As he studied it, images flickered at the edge of his mind. Battles long forgotten. The great pits of Angband, where fire ran like rivers and the air stank of despair. He saw smiths of flame and shadow forging weapons from dark metal, binding spirits into blades and crowns. This ore had come from such a place. It had been part of something greater, perhaps even a relic from Morgoth's hand. Suddenly the silence shattered. A scream rang out from one of the side tunnels, sharp and full of terror. It echoed across the stone like a cry from the deep. Without hesitation, the dwarves turned toward the sound, weapons ready. Gandalf reached out to stop them, but it was too late. Dori and Nari were already moving, vanishing into the shadows beyond. Finan cursed under his breath and followed with Brock at his heels. Orla hesitated, torn between her companions and the altar, but Gandalf called to her sharply. "Stay!" She froze, wide-eyed. He moved to the edge of the tunnel, peering into the dark, but there was no sign of the others. "It's a lure," he muttered. "A memory, not a voice. It uses fear like a net." He turned back to Orla. "We must bring them back." And then the altar cracked. Just a hairline fissure down the center, but it sent a shock through the stone that rattled the floor. From the crack, a sliver of black light flickered, thin but potent. The ground trembled slightly. Gandalf did not wait. He stepped forward, staff raised, and struck the stone beside the oar with the base of his staff. A wave of light burst outward, breaking the illusion. The scream faded. The pressure lifted, but the damage had been done. The oar had awakened. From deep within the tunnels, a new sound rose. Louder, closer, no longer a whisper. Footsteps heavy and dragging. Something was coming. The sound grew louder as Gandalf and Orla stood near the altar, the faint pulse of the oar casting strange shadows along the curved walls. It was no longer a subtle whisper. It was real. Boots dragging, stone grating, a scraping shuffle that echoed down the tunnel like the steps of something long dead, or worse, something that should never have lived. Gandalf turned quickly and lifted his staff high. White light bloomed at its tip, pushing back the darkness for a moment, revealing the mouth of the tunnel the others had entered. There was no sign of them. Only the echoes remain. Orla swallowed hard, adjusting her grip on the long dagger at her side. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "We can't leave them." "We won't," Gandalf replied. "But we must not run blindly. This place," he glanced at the oar, which now pulsed faintly in rhythm with the steps. "This place is made to confuse. It feeds on fear. If we rush in, we'll be lost before we find them." Together, they backed away from the altar, retreating to the edge of the chamber. There, Gandalf knelt and pressed his hand to the floor, whispering words in an ancient tongue that made the air thrum faintly. A shimmer spread from his hand like ripples in still water, and for a brief second, the chamber grew silent. The oar dimmed, the sounds faded, and he opened his eyes. "I see them," he said quickly. "They have been separated, pulled into different paths, but they're alive, at least for now." He rose, gesturing to Orla to follow him. They took the rightmost tunnel, a narrow cliff in the rock that sloped downward and twisted like a serpent. The light from his staff lit the way ahead, revealing clawed markings and strange carvings in the stone. Old symbols half worn by time, not of dwarven craft. The walls felt closer here, the air thinner, pressing in around them like they were being swallowed. They found Brock first. He was crouched at the end of a long passage, axe raised back against the wall. He didn't speak as they approached, only jerked his chin toward a pile of collapsed rubble nearby. The stones were scattered around a crack in the floor through which something moved, slow, slick, and snake-like. Gandalf stepped forward and murmured a word under his breath. The thing beneath the crack hissed and drew back, retreating into the dark. Brock exhaled deeply, rising to his feet. "It was crawling toward me," he said, his voice rough. "Didn't hear it until it was nearly on me. Looked like a vine, but made of smoke and bone. I think it came from the walls." "Not just the walls," Gandalf replied. "The stone here remembers. It carries more than heat. The deeper we go, the more the mountain speaks to it." They didn't linger. With Brock now beside them, they pressed on, following the faint trail left behind by Dori and Nari. The path branched again and again, but Gandalf's magic held. Every time they reached a fork, he would pause, whisper, and let the air guide them. It led them to a wide chamber where the floor was covered in dust, and the ceiling was ringed with jagged stone teeth. Dori stood at its center, panting and pale, sword clutched tightly in both hands. He turned the moment they entered and raised the blade, but lowered it again when he saw their faces. "It took Nari," he said, eyes wild. "The stone it opened just split beneath us, and hands made of iron." They pulled him in. Gandalf approached quickly and laid a hand on the dwarf's shoulder. "Did you see where?" Dori shook his head. "It closed again. There's no sign of him. I tried to dig, but the rock's like metal now, harder than anything I've touched. Not natural." Gandalf studied the floor, which looked solid now, though dark streaks ran across the surface like veins. The black ore had begun to spread. It was no longer confined to the altar. It was growing. "He's alive," Gandalf said after a long moment. "Trapped, perhaps, but not gone." "No more headbod?" asked. Gronraflat asked, frowning. "Because the ore wants him," the wizard replied. "It needs mines to break. It feeds on strength, and Nari is strong. But that gives us a chance." They circled the chamber, inspecting the floor where the collapse had occurred. Gandalf found a section of wall that pulsed with a faint light, barely visible but distinct. He held his staff to it and spoke another word, softer this time. The stone quivered, then cracked, revealing a narrow spiral stair descending even deeper into the mountain's belly. As they began their descent, the warmth vanished. The cold here was pure and ancient, untouched by fire or forge. The stairs ended in a wide tunnel, and across its floor ran a black vein of ore as wide as a river, glowing faintly like embers in the dark. They walked along its edge, moving slowly, careful not to touch it. It pulsed beneath the surface like a living thing, and at times they heard whispers, not words exactly, but suggestions, half-formed thoughts pressing into their minds. Orla stiffened once and had to be pulled away from the edge. Dori muttered to himself, but shook it off when Gandalf called his name. Then they found Nari. He was pinned against the far wall of the tunnel, held fast by black tendrils of stone that coiled around his limbs and chest. His eyes were wide, but he was conscious, though barely. Gandalf rushed to his side, raising his staff. The stone hissed and pulled back slightly, but not enough to free him. The others gathered close, weapons drawn, unsure what to strike. "I can't move," Nari said through clenched teeth. "It's in my head. It's showing me things." "Don't look," Gandalf said. "Close your mind. This ore is part memory, part malice. It thrives on thought." He struck the base of the tendrils with his staff. Light blazed, and the stone recoiled with a shriek like metal grinding against bone. Nari collapsed forward into Orla's arms, gasping for breath. Behind them, the tunnel groaned. Not the ceiling or the walls, but the ore itself. The black vein began to swell, splitting in places, and from those cracks emerged shapes. Humanoid, but wrong. Twisted silhouettes of dwarves. Their limbs fused with metal, faces melted into their helms. Their eyes glowed like cinders, and their movements were stiff and silent. Gandalf stepped in front of the others, raising his staff once more. "They were miners once," he said grimly. "Now they serve the stone." The creatures charged. The tunnel exploded into chaos as the creatures surged forward, their twisted forms rising from the cracked black ore like corpses dragged from some fiery grave. The flickering torchlight revealed their faces, dwarven once, now locked in eternal grimaces, their features fused with dark iron, their eyes burning with a deep, unnatural red. The clinking of metal against stone echoed through the passage as their armored limbs scraped and clawed toward the company. "Hold them!" Gandalf shouted, stepping between the advancing line and the others. His staff swept in an arc, casting a brilliant sheet of white fire across the floor. The leading creature stumbled through the light and screamed, smoke rising from its body where the flame had touched it. But still it came on, undeterred. Brock and Farron met the charge with a thunderous clash of steel, their axes biting into the corrupted dwarves with a sound like tearing stone. The creatures didn't bleed. When struck, they cracked and hissed, black dust spilling from their wounds like sand from shattered glass. Dori and Aura flanked them, driving the attackers back with precise blows and sharp footwork, while Gandalf shielded Nar with a steady wall of fire and light. One of the creatures lunged past Broke, its iron claws aimed for Orla, but she turned and struck it clean across the chest with her curved dagger. The blade slid in as if the thing were hollow, and the creature collapsed into a heap of steaming fragments. She didn't hesitate. Spinning to parry another blow, she called to Nari, who had managed to stand, his face pale but his hand clutching a short blade. "Old way!" "There are too many," Brock growled, glancing at Gandalf. "They keep rising from the crack." "The ore is their source," Gandalf replied sharply. "It remembers them, and as long as it remains exposed, it will raise more." Prin kicked a collapsing body aside, grimacing as he turned. "Then we destroy the vein." "No," Gandalf said quickly, already moving toward the thickest part of the Aurene. "If we shatter it without binding its will, we risk releasing what it holds." He raised his staff and muttered a new spell, older and deeper than the mountain itself. The air around him shimmered, and the ore pulsed violently, dark light writhing like a liquid shadow. The creatures flinched and howled as the light touched them, and for a moment the line faltered. Now, Gandalf shouted, "Push forward!" The dwarves surged as one, axes flashing in the fading light. Dori cleaved through one of the corrupted forms with a cry, while Frelin tackled another and drove his blade into its chest. The black husk shattered around him, and he rose, breathing hard, his beard streaked with soot. Brock roared as he swung his great axe in a wide arc, clearing the space before them. Gandalf advanced to the heart of the vein. The ore throbbed beneath him, alive and resisting. It was not merely stone. It was memory bound in fury, and it screamed against his presence. He planted his staff in the center and spoke again, louder now, calling on the name of Au and the light that came before darkness. For a heartbeat, all went still. Then the ground split. A blast of black flame erupted from the center of the ore vein, sending shards of molten stone in all directions. The light from Gandalf's staff flared so brightly that the company was forced to shield their eyes. The corrupted dwarves shrieked as their forms crumbled into dust, and the walls shook with the fury of the spell. When the light faded, the tunnel was silent again. The black vein had cooled, turned brittle and gray like ash. Gandalf staggered slightly, but remained standing, his staff dim now, the light within flickering low. The others gathered slowly, bruised and bloodied, but alive. Brock examined one of the fallen creatures, nudging the pieces with his boot. "They're hollow," he said, almost to himself. "Empty, like puppets. Theft." "They were echoes," Gandalf said, his voice weary. "Memories shaped by the ore's will. It wears the minds of the dead like masks, drawing from pain and power. but this section is sealed now. Frenan looked back down the corridor. Then we're close. We are, Gandalf replied, but the heart of the curse still lies ahead. They rested briefly, tending to wounds and gathering what strength they could. Orla used her salves to draw the fire from Nari's skin where the tendrils had gripped him, while Dori stood watch. The others ate in silence, chewing dried meat and drinking water with mechanical precision. The air had grown slightly clearer since the blast, and the faint scent of sulfur was replaced by something colder, like the smell of rain on dead stone. When they rose to continue, Gandalf led them along a narrow path that twisted upward away from the shattered vein. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, silent and empty, its roof lost in darkness. Stalactites hung like ancient teeth, and the floor was pitted and cracked. In the center stood a stone pillar, jagged and blackened, and atop it rested a heavy iron helm. Gandalf approached slowly. There was no mistaking it. The helm bore the runes of Khazad-dûm, though they were twisted now, half melted and scorched. Around the base of the pillar lay shattered weapons and fragments of armor, remnants of a battle fought in silence far from the world above. The helm itself pulsed faintly, and the air around it wavered like heat rising from coals. "This is the source," Gandalf said quietly. "It is not the ore itself, but the one who found it first, the one who fed on it and became something else." "Balin?" Orla asked, her voice trembling. "No," Gandalf replied. "But one of his company, perhaps, or something older that found the ore long before. Whatever it was, it shaped the metal around itself and gave it form." He stepped back and raised his staff. "We cannot leave it, not like this." As he began the incantation, the air shuddered. A low sound echoed through the chamber, deep and full of fury. The shadows along the walls twisted and lengthened, and from beneath the pillar the stone began to shift. Something moved. A great shape, cloaked in black steel and shadow, rose from beneath the rock, dragging itself free of the pillar's base. Its face was hidden by a twisted helm, its eyes burning with a dull red glow. In its hands it held a hammer forged of black ore and bone. It had once been a dwarf, but no longer. Now it was something else, something bound to the curse and made its guardian. It raised the hammer and stepped forward. "You are not welcome here," it said, its voice like stone grinding on stone. And the battle for the black ore truly began. The creature stepped forward with a weight that shook the cavern floor, each movement grinding and deliberate, as though the stone itself strained to carry its burden. Its body, once shaped like that of a dwarf, had been twisted by the ore's corruption. Black metal was fused to flesh. Its limbs elongated and encased in plates of dark armor that pulsed faintly with red light. From the shadows of its helm, two crimson eyes burned with the dull heat of ancient fire. Gandalf raised his staff and moved to the front of the company, his white cloak billowing behind him as the magic at the staff's tip flared to life. The light struck the darkness and held it at bay, though it flickered under the pressure of the force that now opposed them. "I know what you are," Gandalf said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "A spirit bound to the stone. You were once free." The figure's head tilted slightly, and a low sound rumbled from within its helm, somewhere between a laugh and a snarl. "There is no freedom, only the forge, only the will of the deep fire." It lifted its hammer, and the veins of black ore embedded in the cavern floor pulsed in response. The ground cracked, and tendrils of living metal burst forth, writhing toward the company like snakes of molten glass. The dwarves scattered, axes flashing, striking at the tendrils as they slithered across the stone. Orla pulled Nari behind a pillar, shielding him with her body, as the tendrils snapped and coiled, seething with hatred. Brock met one head-on, cleaving it in two with a mighty swing of his axe, while Freyn and Dori flanked him, working together to clear a path toward the center. Gandalf advanced toward the creature, every step deliberate, the light of his staff growing stronger with each breath. "I bind you to the earth, you defiled!" he shouted, slamming the staff into the ground. A ring of white fire spread outward, burning across the floor and severing the tendrils where it passed. The creature stumbled, its hammer lowering for a moment, as though the spell had struck something deep within, but it recovered quickly, roaring in fury as it charged. The hammer came down with the force of a falling mountain, striking the stone floor where Gandalf had stood a second before. The blow cracked the rock, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Gandalf was already moving, spinning to the side and raising his staff to deflect a second strike. The impact sent sparks flying, and the air rippled with heat. The dwarves pressed their advantage. Freyn lunged forward and struck the creature's leg with his axe, chipping the armor and forcing it to shift its stance. Brock followed with a heavy blow to the shoulder, while Dori darted in low, aiming for the joints. The creature howled, swatting at them with one arm while swinging its hammer in wide, brutal arcs. "Keep it off balance," Gandalf called. "The ore resists all things except light and true steel." Orla joined the fray, hurling a small vial that burst into white flame where it struck the creature's back. It stumbled forward, and Gandalf took the chance to strike. He raised his staff high and called out a word that had not been spoken in the mountain since before Erebor was carved from stone. The light that blazed forth was blinding, and the creature reeled, its helm cracking down the center. Beneath the metal they glimpsed a face, twisted and pale, its features barely recognizable as dwarven. One eye was missing, replaced by a shard of ore that pulsed with its own malevolent light. It stared at Gandalf, not with hatred, but with something far more terrible: recognition. It whispered, voice ragged, "You were there when the world was broken." "I was," Gandalf answered softly, "and I will not let you break it again." With a sudden burst of speed, the creature swung its hammer in a wide arc, striking the cavern wall and dislodging a massive section of stone. The ceiling above trembled, and dust poured down like rain. Freyn shouted for the others to fall back, as the structure above began to shift. But Gandalf remained where he stood, eyes locked on the creature. "You are bound to this place," he said firmly, voice rising over the rumble. "Your spirit cannot leave unless the stone is shattered." The creature sneered. "Then shatter it, wizard. But you will bring the mountain down with it." Dance hesitated, the staff lowering slightly. He had known the danger. Destroying the core of the ore's corruption would sever its grip, but the magic binding it had roots in the very bedrock. To break it entirely might collapse the cavern, or worse, awaken the deeper veins still untouched. "I can't destroy it here," he said, turning to the others. "We must draw it out, away from the ore, away from the heart of the mountain." Prynn looked at the towering creature which now loomed in the center of the room, like a living statue of rage. "How do you propose we lure that thing anywhere?" Olin Gandalf said suddenly, "If this spirit has any memory, it will remember him the last to challenge its will." And Balin had a journal. Dory blinked in surprise. He always kept one. Yes, he wrote in it constantly. "If we find that journal and use it to call out his name," Gandalf said, "we may be able to stir something buried deep, not just in this creature, but in the stone itself." The creature roared again and surged forward, and the chamber shook with its fury. The company scattered once more, and the battle resumed. As the others fought to keep the Guardian at bay, Gandalf turned and scanned the room. He could feel it. Something hidden, something small but not yet lost. He moved to the far wall where the stone had buckled and cracked. Reaching between two fallen slabs, he pulled free a scorched satchel bound with a clasp shaped like an anvil. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a leather-bound book, worn, stained, but intact. He opened it and found Balin's familiar script, the ink dark and steady despite the wear. The final entries were hurried, filled with warnings and fragments of thought, but one name was repeated over and over again. Thraor Gandalf turned to face the creature, lifting the book high. "Son of Dargan of the Iron Hall, who swore to protect the deep." The creature froze. Its eyes widened, and the hammer dropped to the stone floor with a low, echoing thud. The fire in its eyes flickered, and for a moment something like sorrow passed across its face. "I remember," it whispered. Then, with a great roar, it turned and fled, charging into the lower tunnels away from the ore vein and into the dark. The walls groaned behind it, but the chamber held. Gandalf exhaled deeply and closed the journal. "Now," he said, turning to the others, "we follow, and we end this." The air in the lower tunnels was colder than before. Not simply the chill of buried stone, but something older, deeper. It clung to their cloaks and whispered along their skin like fingers made of smoke. The creature had vanished into the dark, but its presence still echoed through the stone, and the vein of black ore that had once pulsed with unnatural life now lay quiet, brittle as spent coals. Gandalf led the way, the light from his staff illuminating the path ahead. The others followed in a cautious silence, their weapons drawn, eyes sharp. They had fought and survived, but the end had not yet come. Somewhere ahead, beyond the twisting corridors and crumbling halls, the Guardian waited, wounded perhaps, but far from defeated. "We need to drive it to the surface," Gandalf said as they passed beneath an archway so low they had to duck. "The higher we go, the weaker the stone's influence becomes. If we can break the bond there, the mountain may yet survive." Prin glanced sideways at him. "And if we fail, then the forge burns anew." Gandalf replied grimly, "And darkness grows in the north once more." They reached a fork in the tunnel. One path led upward toward the inner mines, and the other veered downward, where a faint red glow shimmered against the stone. Gandalf paused and knelt, placing a hand to the floor. The warmth had returned, faint but growing, and with it the subtle vibration of something moving deep beneath. "Nelson's trying to reach the old furnace levels," he murmured. "If he reaches them, he can anchor himself, draw strength from the remnants of Erebor's ancient fire." Dory stepped forward. "Then we stop him now." Gandalf nodded and turned toward the downward path, though every instinct warned him of the danger. They moved carefully, the tunnels widening as they descended, the walls darker and rougher. The ore reappeared in small patches, glinting faintly beneath layers of soot. Old carts lay rusting along the tracks, and broken tools littered the floor, abandoned in haste long ago. They heard the creature before they saw it, a rhythmic sound like metal dragged over stone, echoing through the dark. It was not alone. Figures moved in the shadows, not as numerous as before, but more deliberate. These weren't memories shaped by the stone. They were real, twisted dwarves, still living, still breathing, bound to the will of the Black Ore. Survivors of Balin's expedition, perhaps, though whatever they had once been was long gone. Orla drew a sharp breath, her hand tightening around her dagger. "They still wear Erebor's seal," she whispered. "They were ours." Frian's expression hardened. "Not anymore," and stepped forward and raised his staff. "No bloodshed if it can be avoided." He spoke a word of command in the old dwarven tongue, a name of the mountain that few remembered. The air shimmered with power, and the corrupted dwarfs hesitated, their eyes flickering as if caught between two worlds. But then the Guardian appeared again, stepping into the light, its helm split, revealing the twisted remains of its face. "You do not command them," it growled. "They are mine." With a wave of its hand, the corrupted dwarves surged forward. The company braced, weapons raised. Brock met the first with a bellow and a swing that cleaved the creature from shoulder to hip. Dori ducked beneath the blow and countered with swift precision, while Aura moved like wind through stone, striking only where she had to, each motion swift and sure. Fen fought with the grim determination of a prince defending his kingdom, never yielding an inch. Gandalf turned his attention to the Guardian. It no longer carried the hammer. It had abandoned it, favoring now its own body, shaped by the ore, strengthened by the curse. It moved faster, less burdened, and its strikes were sharper, more calculated. The wizard countered with magic woven into every flick of his staff, blinding bursts of light and shields of force that turned aside the worst of the blows. The chamber shook as the battle reached its peak. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the old stone creaked and groaned. The Guardian lunged, catching Gandalf off balance and slamming him hard against the wall. The light of the staff dimmed, and for a moment the world tilted. But Gandalf was not finished. He rose slowly, breathing hard, eyes blazing. "You were a protector once," he said, voice but unwavering. "You stood watch over your kin. You bore arms not for conquest, but for honor that is still within you, buried beneath the rot." The creature hesitated just for a moment, and Gandalf struck. He drove his staff into the ground and shouted a word that echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. The black ore cracked beneath their feet, glowing white, hot for an instant, before erupting in a shockwave of light. The corrupted dwarves screamed and fell, writhing as the spell severed the link between them and the stone. The Guardian staggered, roaring in pain, one arm crumbling away as the ore that held it together shattered. Prince seized the moment and charged, his axe finding the exposed joint at the creature's side. The blow struck true, and the Guardian fell to one knee, howling with a voice that made the very walls tremble. Brock followed, smashing aside its defense with brute force, while Dori and Orla drove it back, step by step, toward the edge of a broken ledge that dropped into one of the old slag pits below. Gandalf approached, staff raised. "You will not rise again." The Guardian looked up, eyes dim now, the last embers of fire flickering in its gaze. "We only wanted to build," it whispered, "to craft, to be remembered." "And you shall be," Gandalf replied. but not like this. He brought the staff down one final time. The light that burst forth was blinding, swallowing the creature whole. The ledge cracked, and the guardian slipped backward, falling silently into the depths below. The silence that followed was complete, like the breath held by the mountain itself. The ore stopped glowing. The air grew still, and the curse was broken. The dust had not yet settled when the company gathered near the edge of the pit, staring down into the dark where the guardian had fallen. The echoes of its scream still lingered in the stone, but the fire was gone where once the black ore pulsed with malevolent life. There was now only silence and the faint smell of scorched earth. For the first time since they had entered the lower deeps, the mountain felt still. Finan was the first to move, lowering his axe and resting a hand against the nearby wall. The tension in his shoulders eased, but his face remained grim. "Is it truly done?" he asked, not turning to look at Gandalf. The wizard stood quietly, his white robes streaked with ash, the light in his staff now dimmed to a soft glow. He looked weary, older than before, the lines around his eyes deeper. "The creature is gone," he said after a pause. "Its spirit was bound to the curse, and with the stone broken, it can no longer remain. But the darkness it served, that which lingered in the ore, has not been fully destroyed, only sealed again." Dori let out a low breath. "Then it can rise again." "Not easily," Gandalf replied. "What was awakened here took centuries to fester. Without the Guardian, it has no mind, no will. But if left unattended, deep places remember. Evil is patient. It waits." They made their way back through the ruined tunnel, stepping carefully over fallen stone and the husks of the corrupted dwarves. Some had collapsed where they stood, their bodies now limp and silent. Others had fled when the bond was broken, disappearing into the cracks and shadows. Orlo said nothing as they passed, but she glanced at each face, and Gandalf saw the pain behind her silence. She attended the wounded in many battles, but this was something different. These had not been enemies, they had been brothers, cousins, sons of the mountain, twisted by something they never understood. They reached the chamber with the shattered altar and the cracked door. It no longer pulsed or whispered. The faint hum of power had vanished, replaced by a dead stillness that filled the space like dust. Gandalf paused and raised his staff, murmuring a soft incantation. A glow spread across the stone, white and faintly blue, weaving through the veins like a frost creeping over glass. The last remnants of the curse dimmed and faded, sealed beneath layers of old Fran stood beside him, arms crossed. "What now?" Gandalf turned, his gaze distant. "Now we go back. We carry Balin's journal to Thorin. We tell him what happened and what nearly happened. The lower halls must be sealed, the stone buried, not mined." Brock grunted. "The king won't be happy. That ore, whatever it was, some will say we should have kept it, forged it into something useful." "Power taken from darkness never brings good," Gandalf said. "Only delay. The ore is a remnant of Morgoth's will, shaped by hatred, not by craft. To wield it is to bind yourself to the same ruin." The company rested in the higher galleries for a few hours before beginning the long ascent. The way up felt different, less oppressive, though no less treacherous. The mountain groaned occasionally, a sound not of threat, but of deep exhaustion, like an old creature settling into sleep after a long watch. When they passed through the old camp where they'd first descended, Orla stopped and picked up the torn banner bearing Balin's crest. She folded it carefully and said nothing, slipping it into her pack. They reached the gates of Erebor just as the first light of day touched the eastern sky. The stone towers gleamed with frost, and the wind was crisp and clean. Thorin, the third Stonehelm, waited at the entrance, flanked by guards. His face remained still as the company approached, but when he saw the state of them, tired, blood-stained, yet alive, his expression softened. "You returned," he said, and Balin Gandalf stepped forward and held out the journal. "He did not survive, but he stood bravely. He tried to warn you." Thorin took the book with both hands, his fingers tightening around the leather binding, and the stone sealed but not destroyed. "You must never dig that deep again." There was silence then, heavy and long. The wind stirred the banners overhead, and the guards shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of what had been spoken. Thorin nodded once, a slow and measured motion. "I will see that it is done." The company disbanded that evening. Brock returned to the forges, vowing to cast his axe into the molten iron and forge no blade until he could do so without seeing the eyes of the corrupted in his dreams. Orla chose to remain in Erebor for a time, tending the wounded and studying the runes left behind. Dori and Nari left quietly, taking the long road south to visit old kin and reflect on the strange war they had fought. Finn stood with Gandalf at the gates the next morning, watching the sun rise over the gray slopes of the Iron Hills. "You think this will be the end of it?" he asked. "No," Gandalf said, "but it will be enough for now." He adjusted his cloak, pulled his hood against the cold, and stepped onto the path leading away from the mountain. As he walked, the wind picked up behind him, lifting his cloak and staff with gentle strength. The road stretched ahead, winding through the valleys and forests of a world still healing. The curse had been broken, but darkness never dies. It retreats and waits. And somewhere in the shadowed corners of Middle-earth, something else began to stir. Though the curse had been sealed beneath stone and fire, Gandalf did not rest. He had left Erebor behind, but his thoughts remained in the dark places below, where the black ore still slumbered beneath the mountain's weight. He rode west across the Wilderland, beneath silver clouds and fading autumn trees, following the river until it narrowed and twisted into the misty mountains. There were signs, subtle and troubling, that something had been disturbed far beyond Erebor. At night, when he made camp beneath the stars, he listened to the wind and felt its warning in his bones. Birds no longer sang in some parts of the forest. The wolves had grown quiet. In the lands near Gundabad, the old stones whispered when touched, cold as ice, as if they remembered the oar's touch and feared its return. Gandalf kept a careful watch on the sky, for strange shapes had been spotted over the hills, wings that did not belong to eagles, and voices that spoke in tongues long buried. By the time he reached Rivendell, the sun had turned pale and low, and the golden woods of Imladras had begun to Elrond received him with warmth, but his expression darkened as Gandalf recounted the tale. The elves of Rivendell had long watched the movements of shadow in the east, but this was no mere flicker. It was a wound reopening, one stitched with fire and malice. "It is as I feared," Elrond said, standing beside the quiet stream that ran through the heart of the valley. "You have not destroyed it. You have delayed it. The stone you found, this black ore, is but a fragment, and if it truly remembers Morgoth's shaping, there may be more." "I know," Gandalf replied. and now others may seek it. Elrond nodded slowly, the weight of ages in his gaze. There are still those in the East who revere the old powers, who dream of fire and thrones built on fear. If they learn of Erebor's finding, they will come, Gandalf finished, the words heavy on his tongue. They spoke long into the night, and Gandalf spent the next day poring through ancient texts and scrolls in Rivendell's vast library. He sought records of Morgoth's forges, of the weapons and relics shaped in the deep pits of Angband before its fall. Most had been destroyed or scattered in the War of Wrath. But some whispers remained of chains that could bind dragons, of helms that saw through lies, and of ore blacker than shadow drawn from the edge of the void itself. He found a single note, faded and half lost, written by a lore master of Beleriand. It spoke of a substance called Dumoir, stone of the forgotten fire, said to have been mined by creatures older than dwarves, creatures who no longer walked the surface of the world. It was used rarely, for it could not be forged by hand alone. It required a will greater than its own, and a spirit willing to be bound. And closed the scroll and sat in silence. The guardian of Erebor had not created the curse. He had merely become its vessel. And if more of the ore remained hidden in Middle-earth, it would call out again. He departed Rivendell at first light, riding south along the ancient road toward the White Mountains. His thoughts were troubled, and his rest was brief. He visited outposts of men along the way, speaking to chieftains and scouts, asking if they had seen signs, strangers bearing black metal, merchants trading in strange stone, or soldiers behaving with unnatural cruelty. Most had nothing to report, but one tale caught his ear. In a village near the southern foothills of Ered Nimrais, a hunter had returned from the hills with a broken spear tip unlike any seen before. The iron was dark, brittle at the edges, but warm to the touch, as if it retained the heat of some distant fire. The hunter had fallen ill shortly after his return, muttering in his sleep, and waking with blood on his hands, and no memory of what he had done. Gandalf went to the village at once. The place was quiet, its streets nearly empty. The air held a scent of smoke and pine, but also something acrid, something sharp beneath the surface. The villagers greeted him with caution, watching from behind shutters and doorways. Only the headman, a stooped man with gray in his beard and weary eyes, came forward to speak. "That was one of ours," the headman said, leading Gandalf to a small house on the edge of the woods. "Never," raised his voice. "Never drank more than he should." Then it brought back that spear tip, and everything changed. Inside the house, the air was heavy. The walls had been scratched with runes and strange marks. In the corner sat the hunter, bound by ropes and watched by a silent guard. He looked up as Gandalf entered, his eyes sunken but still aware. The spear tip had been placed on a low table nearby, wrapped in cloth, though the cloth now smoked faintly where it touched the metal. Gandalf approached it carefully and unwrapped a corner. The ore was the same. It glistened in the light of his staff, black and glassy, faintly pulsing. He closed the cloth over it again and turned to the hunter. "Do you know where you found it?" The man blinked slowly. "In the caves north of the pass. It wasn't alone." Gandalf's heart tightened. What else was there? The hunter's voice dropped to a whisper. Voices, whispers in the stone. They said the mountain is not the only one. That others sleep, that one has already woken. He tried to say more, but his voice failed. The guard stepped forward and gently urged him to lie back, and the headman looked at Gandalf with a mix of hope and fear. "Can you help him?" "I will try," Gandalf said, but he knew it would not be easy. The man's soul had touched the edge of something ancient and cruel. Even now, the oar was trying to find a way back into the world. That night, Gandalf built a circle of fire outside the village, set the spear tip at its center, and spoke words of binding drawn from the west. The flame burned high and the wind howled, but when dawn came, only ash remained. He buried it beneath stone and marked the place with wards of protection. It would hold for now. But something deeper stirred within him, a sense that the black oar influence was spreading, not like a fire, but like roots beneath the earth, reaching across the land in secret. The curse of Erebor had not ended with the Guardian's fall. It had only begun to awaken. The snows had come early to the White Mountains. Gandalf rode beneath a sky streaked with gray, his cloak drawn close against the wind, which howled down from the peaks like a warning. He had left the village behind 2 days earlier, the troubling tale of the black spear-tip weighing heavily on his thoughts. Southward he rode now toward the ancient mountain passes once used by the Rohirrim. For the hunter's words had revealed more than he had realized at first, more than a single cursed relic, more than whispers in the dark. If the ore had been found this far from Erebor and in a place untouched by dwarves, then the veins beneath the world were longer, older, and more widespread than anyone had guessed. He made camp that night near the edge of an old wood, sheltered beneath the roots of a leaning pine. The fire crackled steadily, and his horse, Shadowfoot, rested nearby with a watchful stillness. Gandalf sat wrapped in his cloak, the staff laid across his knees, and his gaze fixed on the flames. The wind had stilled, but the night was not quiet. There were sounds in the trees, soft, deliberate sounds. Not the scurrying of small beasts or the creak of frozen branches, but the step of something with purpose. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried through the dark like a thread of light. "You might as well come out. I've heard every step since sunset." There was a pause, then a faint rustle, and from behind a low boulder stepped a young figure wrapped in a weather-beaten cloak, eyes wide and pale in the firelight. He looked no older than 16, though his clothes were rough and travel-worn. A short hunting knife hung at his belt, and his boots were crusted. "I didn't mean to follow," the boy said quickly. "I just saw you leave the village, and, well, they said you were a wizard." "They say many things," Gandalf replied, not unkindly. "What's your name?" "Ken." "Then Kawan. You followed me into the mountains at night, alone, with nothing but a knife and a thin cloak. That seems—" "I can help," the boy said, stepping closer. "I know the hills better than anyone. My father was a pathfinder for the Westfold. He taught me where the caves are, ones even the old men don't talk about. You're looking for something hidden." Gandalf studied the boy's face, noting the earnestness there and the spark of something else, something stronger than simple curiosity. "You've seen the ore," he said. Callan looked down at the fire. "Yes, in one of the caves." "I didn't touch it, but I heard it. It speaks sometimes, like a song you can't quite hear." "There wasn't a song," Gandalf said quietly, "and you were wise not to touch it." "I thought it was just some kind of stone at first," the boy went on. "But then my friend did touch it, just brushed it with his hand. He screamed, said there were voices in his head. We ran, but he never came back. His mother says he left for the coast, but I think he's still out there, still near the caves." Gandalf nodded slowly. The pattern was becoming clear. The oar called to the lonely, the brave, the curious, those willing to wander beyond the edge of the known world. "Take me there," he said at last. They left at first light, traveling westward along narrow game trails that twisted through forest and rock. Callan led the way with quiet confidence, and though the path grew steeper, he never faltered. The boy had the makings of a ranger, keen-eyed, steady-footed, and stubborn as a mountain goat. They spoke little as they climbed, for the air had taken on a strange... Even the birds had vanished. By midday they reached the mouth of a narrow ravine, where the stone walls pressed close, and the wind no longer reached. Callan pointed ahead. "It's through there, just beyond the ridge. The cave's mouth is low, almost hidden." We used to dare each other to crawl inside when we were younger, before we knew what was buried there. As they entered the ravine, Gandalf could feel the same weight in the air he had felt beneath Erebor, though fainter, as if filtered through layers of earth and time. The black oar was near, and it was aware. They climbed carefully along the ledge, passing frozen pools and crumbling rocks, until they came to a break in the wall no larger than a man's shoulders. A chill breeze whispered from within, carrying with it a scent of old ash and stone. Callan crouched beside the entrance. "I won't go farther. Not again." "That's wise," Gandalf said. He lit his staff, and the glow spread into the narrow chamber beyond, illuminating rough stone and tangled roots. The cave twisted downward, not far, but far enough. He stepped inside, and the light cast flickering shadows along the wall. At the back of the chamber, buried beneath layers of frost, lay a single shard of black ore, smaller than the others he had seen, but no less dangerous. It pulsed faintly, and as he stepped near, he felt its presence press against his mind. Not words, but impressions. Fire chains, a forge that had no name, and laughter distant and terrible from a voice that had not spoken aloud in an age. He raised his staff and began the spell. The cave trembled as the light flared. The shard screamed, not with sound, but with pressure, like stone buckling under water. He forced the binding deeper, sealing it beneath frost and fire until the pulsing stopped. When he stepped outside again, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. Callan stood waiting, eyes wide. "Did you destroy it?" "No," Gandalf said. "I buried it again. That's all that can be done for now." They walked back in silence, though the boy had questions burning in his eyes. He waited until they reached the tray line to ask the one that mattered most. "There are more, aren't there?" "Yes," Gandalf answered without hesitation. "Many more." Gandalf and Carlin reached the edge of the valley, just as the sky faded from gold to indigo. The stars began to bloom overhead, distant and clear, scattered across the heavens like shards of old light. A low mist clung to the hollows of the land, and though no wind stirred the trees, the night felt restless, as if the earth itself were listening. They camped beside a stream where the water ran cold and fast between stones. Callan had grown quiet again, though his hands worked methodically to gather wood and build the fire. Ganondorf watched him for a time, then finally spoke. "You saw more than you told me." The boy paused, but didn't look up. "There was a door," he said at last, his voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "At the back of the cave, behind the shard, not made by dwarves or men. It was smooth, like black glass, and it hummed. I couldn't open it, but when I touched it, it felt like it wanted to open for someone else. Gandalf felt a deep cold settle in his chest. He had suspected something of the kind, but hearing it aloud brought the truth into sharper focus. "That was no ordinary stone," he said. "The ore is not only a fragment of darkness, it is a key, one that opens doors better left sealed." Calen stirred the fire, his brow furrowed. "What's behind it?" "Memory," Gandalf said. "Power that should have perished when Morgoth fell. And if someone finds a way to use it, they won't simply awaken the past. They'll reshape it." They slept in turns that night, keeping watch beneath the stars. When morning came, Gandalf prepared to part ways. Calen stood beside him at the trail's fork, his eyes still full of questions. "You should return to your people," Gandalf told him. "Stay away from the caves and speak of what you saw only to those who understand the danger. If the stone calls again, you must know." "But what if it's already too late?" Cullen asked. And Alf didn't smile. "Then we do what we must. We gather those who still remember the old world, and we stand against..." They parted with a few words more, and the boy watched as the wizard vanished into the trees, his white staff flickering like a lone candle in the dawn. Gandalf continued south past crumbling ruins and old watchposts once built by Gondor. As he traveled, he marked the land carefully, watching for any sign that the ore had left its mark. In the marshes of Nindolf, he found black stones half-skin in the mud, arranged in a strange spiral. In the highlands beyond Anorion, a ruined tower bore scorch marks unlike any fire known to man, and the scent of iron and ash still clung to its stones. Everywhere he went, the signs grew more frequent. The black ore was not only stirring, it was spreading. In Minas Tirith, Gandalf met with King Elazar beneath the white tree. They spoke in the tower hall, away from listening ears. And though the king remained composed, there was a shadow in his eyes. "You're certain?" Aragorn asked. "This ore is not confined to Erebor." Gandalf nodded. "Fragments are being uncovered across the land." "Not by chance. Someone is searching, and they know where to look." Aragorn paced slowly between the marble pillars, the white light of the morning sun painting his cloak with gold. "We've received reports from the east," he said. "Riders near the Sea of Rune bearing strange weapons, blades that burn the skin when touched, and mail that sings in the dark. Traders from Khand have begun to speak of a new master, one who promises strength and the return of the true flame." "That is what I feared." Gandalf said it has begun again, not openly, not as Sauron did, but in whispers, in secrets and shadows. The black ore is being gathered, and its purpose is not yet clear, but it will be. Aragorn drew his sword and laid it across the table. Andorral gleamed in the pale light, the runes along its edge faintly glowing. "You have my strength if it comes to that, and Gondor's." "I pray it will not," Gandalf said, "but we must be ready." In the days that followed, messengers were sent quietly to the corners of the realm. The elves of Lothlorien and the remnants in Lynnan were warned. Dwarves in the Iron Hills and beyond were urged to seal their deepest minds. Rangers were dispatched to the edges of Rue and Harad, and in the hidden archives of Minest, scholars began to search the oldest records for any mention of. But the enemy moved faster. One night, as Gandalf rode north toward Bree to speak with old allies, a storm rose over the hills, black and furious without warning. Lightning split the sky, and the road turned slick with mud. He found shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, but the wind carried more. There were voices in it, too low for any mortal tongue, repeating names that had not been spoken aloud in an aid. When the lightning flared again, he saw a figure watching from the ridgeline. Not a man, nor a beast, but something cloaked in a mantle of shifting darkness. It stood unmoving, eyes glowing faintly red, and when Gandalf raised his staff to challenge it, the figure vanished like smoke in wind. He did not sleep that night. By the time he reached Bree, the sun had returned, and the land looked peaceful again, as if nothing had passed. But something had. A line had been crossed. In the common room of the Prancing Pony, he found Barlaam Butterb, older but still cheerful. And among the few travelers gathered near the fire was a face he had not seen in years. A man named Halos, once a ranger of the north. They spoke quietly, sharing news, and Gandalf listened closely as Halos described a strange encounter near the ruins of Fornost. There was a pool where once there was none, Howe said, black as ink, though the sky was clear. No birds sang near it, and the trees had begun to rot. We saw tracks leading into the water, but none came out. Gandalf finished his drink and stood. Then the north is no longer safe. And where will you go now? Halos asked. Where the stone sleeps deepest, Gandalf said. Because if the curse is to be broken for good, it must be broken at its root. The wild north was colder than Gandalf remembered. As he crossed the weather hills and left Bree behind, the wind came from the west, sharp and bitter, and the land grew quiet beneath his passing. Few traveled this far into the hills now, and even few were beyond them. The ruins of Fornost stood on the horizon like the bones of a forgotten king, broad towers crumbling beneath ivy and moss, half swallowed by the land, as though the earth itself had tried to forget what had once risen here. But Gandalf remembered. He walked through the outer gates at dawn, his staff tapping softly against stone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and silence. Birds circled above, but they did not sing. The halls were empty, their arches twisted by time, but the deeper vaults remained untouched. Beneath Fornost, long before it fell to the Witch King, there had been hidden chambers, old places carved in secret by the men of Western, to store things they feared but dared not destroy. He found the entrance near the base of a collapsed tower, concealed behind a wall of fallen stone. A narrow stair wound down into darkness, the air turning colder with every step. When at last he reached the bottom, he found the seal unbroken, a single stone door carved with the tree and stars of Arnor, and beneath it, a line in the high speech of the West. Let none pass but those who remember. Gandalf placed his hand upon the seal and whispered the ancient name of Elendil. Light burst along the carvings like a river of silver, and with a low, grinding sound, the door swung open. Beyond it lay a chamber lined with vaults, and in the center, atop a wide dais, rested a stone table veined with black. The ore was there, as he had feared, locked inside a crystal sphere, its glow dim but unmistakable. He approached slowly, studying the air as much as the room. The pressure was stronger here, less like a weight and more like a presence. The black ore did not whisper, but it watched. It had been watching for a long time. He reached into his robes and drew forth a second sphere, smaller, etched with runes of warding, and held it over the ore. The crystal pulsed once, then began to hum. From the shadows behind him, a voice spoke. "You should not have come." Gandalf turned, his staff rising at once, casting light into the far corners of the vault. A man stood there, tall, cloaked, and still as the stone itself. His eyes gleamed beneath his hood, not red like the creatures beneath Erebor, but silver, sharp, and cold. "Who are you?" Gandalf asked. "A keeper," the man replied. "One of many. We were set to watch these stones long before your kind forgot their names." Gandalf frowned, lowering the sphere, but keeping his staff alike. "I was told all watchers of the northern vaults were slain in the wars." "Most were," the man said. "But not all. Some of us chose silence, chose to become stone and shadow until the hour of waking." "But in that hour is now?" Gandalf asked. The keeper did not blink. "The ore has... The veins are open. You sealed a crack, nothing more. The earth remembers." "I know," Gandalf said quietly. "That is why I came." He moved toward the dais, but the keeper's hand went to the hilt at his side. "Do not touch it. It is bound to more than stone." Gandalf's voice remained calm. "I don't intend to take it. I came to learn if this piece was still bound, or if it had begun to call." The keeper hesitated, then slowly stepped aside. "It called weeks ago, and something answered." A long silence followed, broken only by the soft hum of the sphere. Gandalf turned back to the ore, watching the faint pulse within. "Where is the heart?" he asked at last. The keeper did not pretend to misunderstand. Far beneath the world, beneath the roots of the gray mountains, in the lost halls, where even dragons once feared to tread, it was buried there by those who served Morgoth in the First Age. They failed to raise it. The Valor broke their forges, but the seed was never destroyed, only scattered. Gandalf closed his eyes, listening to the deep pulse of the earth. "And now it stirs again. It has many names," the keeper said, "but the one you should remember is Narroth, the Heart of Unmaking." Old wind swept through the vault, though no door had opened. Gandalf turned and began to pace slowly. "If what you say is true, then it must be found and sealed before it rises, this time for good. You cannot do it alone." "No," Gandalf admitted, "but I won't be alone." He took the sphere and bound it within a satchel of woven steel and silver thread. The ore within dimmed once more. Though it did not fall silent, he could still feel its presence, like a dream that clings after waking. The keeper watched him without expression. "If you go to Narroth, you will not return unchanged." "Perhaps not," Gandalf said, turning toward the stair. "But change is better than ruin." He left Fornost before midday and rode south through the lowlands, across frozen fields, and through the frost-kissed woods of the North Downs. That night he lit no fire and pitched no camp. He walked in silence, deep in thought, his breath misting before him, and the staff's faint glow guiding the way. At dawn, he reached a quiet glen where 3 paths crossed beneath the branches of an ancient oak. There, waiting beside a stone marked with runes too old for the common tongue, stood a figure in silver mail. Her cloak was deep green, her bow carved from the heartwood of a mallar tree, and her eyes were the color of winter water. Lady Aranel. Gandalf greeted her with a bow. "You're late," she said. "I had to visit the dead," he replied. and they talk more than I expected." She smiled faintly, then turned to the south. "The others are gathering. You've stirred the wind, Mithrand. Even the trees are uneasy." "They should be," Gandalf said. "The black fire is rising again, and we're riding into it." "We are," he said, "but we ride together." She nodded once, then turned and vanished into the trees. Gandalf followed. They gathered beneath the high eaves of the southern greenwood, where the trees stood tall and proud, their trunks silver gray and their leaves like green fire in the wind. It was not a large company, but it was carefully chosen, drawn from the hidden corners of Middle-earth, from the quiet places where watchful eyes still kept the old ways. There were 6 in all. Aranel of the woodland realm, swift and silent, her arrows keen as moonlight. Dumoir, a ranger of the north, quiet and sharp-eyed, whose sword had once belonged to a captain of Arnor. Fenrose, an elf of Lindon, who had not set foot in battle since the fall of Gilgalad, but who now came with a voice that could command stone to break and rivers to part. Thurin and Midas, brother and sister of Rowan, writers skilled in scouting the forgotten trails of the world. And Gandalf, tall and white, leaning on his staff, the weight of many ages resting behind his eyes. They did not march as soldiers, but moved like wind and river, slipping through forest and hill, avoiding the roads that had grown dangerous. Their path led steadily north and west, through lands where the stars seemed dimmer and the soil colder. Wordless signs met them as they traveled, trees with their roots scorched, small animals lying still without wound or cause, water gone brackish without reason. The earth itself was whispering that something unnatural was waking below. One evening, as they camped in a ring of standing stones, older than the kingdom of Gondor, Gandalf laid a map before them, one drawn long ago, when the world was wider and more wild. His hand traced the jagged edge of the gray mountains, and paused at a point deep in the range where no road led and no name remained. "Here," he said, "beneath these peaks lies Narroth, the forge that was never quenched. It was hidden even from the elves. Morgoth's servants buried it when their master fell, hoping to return one day and claim it. No one ever did, until now." Aranel said, her voice soft. Fenrose leaned forward. "And if we find it, we seal it," Gandalf replied. "Not with fire or steel, with will, with light older than the flame that forged it." They journeyed into the mountains as winter crept behind them. Snow clung to the ridges, and the wind howled down the valleys with a voice like the cries of long-dead kings. On the 3rd night, they found a door carved into the stone, half buried beneath centuries of frost. No inscription marked it, but Gandalf knew. He placed his hand upon the cold rock and spoke the words that had once closed it. The door opened. Beyond lay a path of stone that twisted downward, far below the world of trees and sky. The air was dry and still, untouched by time. Their footsteps echoed as they moved, and the walls began to change. First carved with simple patterns, then with symbols that shimmered faintly as they passed. Runes of flame, shapes of forging tools, and open eyes. Symbols of a craft too deep to be dwarven and too cruel to be elven. At last they reached a vast cavern, silent and wide, filled with broken anvils and shattered chains. In its center stood a great forge, cracked and dark. Around it the black ore grew like roots from the ground, pulsing gently, and above it Suspended by strands of molten metal hung a heart of stone, dull, silent, but waiting. Gandalf stepped forward, his staff held high. "This is it," he said. "The first forge, the heart of the black ore. If we leave it, it will wake. If we break it, it will spread. We have one chance." He drew from his robes the crystal sphere taken from Fornost and placed it on the ground. The glow inside matched the rhythm of the ore, pulsing in time with the heart above. He turned to the others. "You must stand with me, not with swords, with will, with what you carry in your spirit. This curse is not just power. It is memory, pain, desire. It cannot be destroyed by might, only by unity." They formed a circle, hands upon weapons, feet steady upon the stone. Gandalf began to speak, not in a loud voice, but in one that carried across the chamber. Words of the West, words of creation, words that named the world before the shadow touched it. The heart above them shuddered. The black ore began to glow more fiercely. From the walls, tendrils of metal began to reach outward, creeping toward them. Gandalf raised his staff. Light exploded from its tip, driving the shadows back. The tendrils writhed, screeched, and vanished into dust. The others stood firm, their voices joining his. Not words they knew, but strength drawn from memory, from honor, from all the light they had ever known. Meredith spoke the name of her mother. Thurin remembered a song sung in a golden hall. Pharaoh whispered the stars he had watched over the sea. Dinar stood silently, his eyes closed, face turned upward, and Aranel wept, but her tears turned to silver as they touched the stone. The heart cracked. A scream filled the chamber, not from above, but from deep below, as if the mountain itself cried out in pain. The light from Gandalf's staff grew blinding, and the black ore ignited, not with flame, but with a terrible white fire that consumed without heat. The heart shattered, the forge collapsed, the stone shook, and the curse was broken. When they emerged from the mountain, the snow had melted, the air was clear, and the sky was blue from horizon to horizon. Birds sang again. The land had exhaled. They parted quietly. Danner returned to the north, Fenrose to Lindon. Meredith and Thurland rode for the plains of Rohan. Aranel vanished into the woods without a word, and Gandalf stood alone on the edge of the mountains, watching the wind move through the grass. The black ore was gone. The veins were sealed, but the memory would remain as it always did. He turned south toward the lands of men, and though the road was long, he walked it with peace in his heart. For light had endured once more,